Assalamu alaikum and good day to our fellow listeners. My name is Lydia, and alongside me is Alia, who will be presenting on the principles and procedures of material development for listening. First, let's take a look into the objectives that we will cover in this short video. We will look into the principles and procedures when it comes to material development for listening skills. We also intend to explain on the integrated principles and procedures when it comes to listening skills, especially in your classroom. Before we get into the crux of our video today, it is important for us to discover the models that our principles and procedures are based on. First of all, we have O'Malley's top-down model. This is a listener-based model in which you integrate information that your listeners have prior knowledge of. For example, you could discuss about your day at the beach. Some options or questions your students could ask you would include the weather or the crowd at the beach. This implies that your students have been to the venue and can anticipate what will happen next. Here, some options you can use for your top-down model would include identifying the topic and identifying the speaker. Allow your students to make predictions and even encourage them to remember some vocabulary and, most importantly, take notes during the audio listening session. On the other side of this model is the bottom-up model. This, on the other hand, is a text-based model. What this entails is your students have no prior knowledge to the topic that they are listening to. Their knowledge will be derived solely from the audio that you're listening to. Get them to listen to specific details. Ask them to recognize word order patterns and even recognize sounds that they may be unfamiliar with. In your classroom, we are sure that you will soon realize that you cannot choose a specific model when it comes to listening skills. You need to integrate both of these models, and this way you can avoid a linear and somewhat boring process, and on the other hand, turn your listening skills session into something that is interactive and encourage your students to listen effectively. As you'll come to discover, listening skills are imperative for ESL learners as it is one of the major skills when it comes to effectively using and understanding the English language. First of all, it is important to realize that contextualization is key. What may be of interest to you may not interest your students. For example, you are interested in the woodworking aspect of furniture building. You know the different grains and wood types when it comes to furniture building. Your students may offer a different response when you bring up this topic. So the next time you choose an audio for your students to listen to, try getting something relatable. Spark your students' interest by including audios that involve them. For example, themes on social media, bullying, body image issues, current political events. Get your students to listen and engage in the audio that you are presenting them. Next, we will look into the second principle and an equally important aspect when it comes to material development for listening skills. You have to choose the right materials when it comes to listening. Get something that is of interest to your students. Make sure that it is culturally relevant, and an especially important aspect when you choose your materials would be to consider the speed and accent of the audio that you play them. You should also consider integrating more than just listening during your sessions. Get your students to engage in the three other skills when it comes to language acquisition. Prior to getting them to sit down and listen to the audio, get them to read of a text with a similar theme of the audio you will play them later. After that, try to get them to engage further in the theme that they have already listened and read about. Get them to speak about it. Get them to write about it. Get them to integrate all of these skills for the purpose of further empowering their overall language skills. Next, you should gear your activities to teach instead of solely testing your students' abilities to listen effectively. You need to understand that in the long game, by equipping your students with the proper listening skills, you are preparing them for a better experience in the workforce or even in their future when they engage in communication that brings meaning. Prepare your materials in a sense that can empower them. Lastly, encourage the development of listening strategies in your students based on their proficiency level. For your students who have a slightly lower proficiency, get them to recognize new vocabulary that they have discovered in the audio that they listened to. On the other hand, for your intermediate students, get them to pick out certain themes and ideas when they listen to the audio. On the other hand, for your more proficient students, get them to reiterate the audio that they have listened to in their own words. Make sure you cater to each of your students' proficiency level in a way that encourages them to listen more effectively in the future.
Moving on, in the next section of the module, you will be introduced to the procedure of material development for listening. As such, this module breaks down the procedural strategy into three sections, namely pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening. In all three-level procedure, we will talk about how to address pedagogical challenges arise during listening lesson. For pre-listening, rather than designing lengthy pre-listening activities, you can identify the parts of the audio that will be most challenging for students to understand before the class begins. Then, you build up the schemata through a class discussion to provide students with necessary information about the listening track. And another option is to have your student listen to the recording for the first time to get used to the speaker's voice. As for while listening procedure, since listening occurs in real time, it is difficult to control how fast information is presented. The unfamiliarity with the accent and background noises causes the student to be unable to recognize the word and therefore impede their understanding. To prevent this from happening, you can provide students with tasks to help them focus during lesson. You can also play the recording additional time if needed, and you can also find good resources such as video snippet with English subtitle, which is a good resource for reading while listening activity. Last but not least is the post-listening procedure. While pre-listening activities influence comprehension, post-listening activities are intended to keep students engaged beyond the listening stage and encourage them to continue practicing the language. Listed here are some ideas for post-listening activities that you can use with your student. First, mind the transcript, in which you provide student with a transcript of the audio and have the student go over the transcript and assess which area they had difficulty listening to. Second, you can set a speaking task. Ask the student to perform a related speaking activity. And the third one, personalize the listening text. Find ways that student can relate to the text. In conclusion, listening material coupled with efficient teaching principle and procedure are essential to meet the learning objective. We hope you will find this module helpful in enhancing your understanding on how to teach listening more effectively. Last but not least, towards the end of the module, there will be assessment for you to check your understanding in the form of quiz assessment. Also included several useful links for your own reference.